Um, so this is the next challenge. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't keep extending your test framework or you can't have a go at the process exercises. These are all different things that you can spend time doing. The Boris Pikes challenge is meant to be done in pairs. The process exercises can be done in pairs. They can also be done individually. And extending your test framework, you can do as much as you want. If you're stuck on things to do for the test framework or for anything, just let me know and I'll be able to point you in the right direction. This challenge is about translating user stories into a working program. And so it's divided into 3 parts. Part 1, part 2, part 3, and some extension work. If you get to the extension work, definitely come back to me and I'll give you more things to do. We've gone through having a look at what user stories are, and this is all that you'll get. So from this, we have to build up our domain model. I'm going to ignore part 2 and part 3 and the extensions. I'm just going to have a look at these 2 user stories. Let's see how we translate this using our technique of mapping all the nouns and verbs to objects and messages. To the next step. Before I do this, I'm just going to quickly run through the setup for our test framework and just create a working directory. So you can watch me do that and see what that looks like. It's being recorded, so at any point you'll be able to come back and have a look at this at your own leisure. But definitely feel free to shout out like, Ed, what are you doing? Or why are you doing that? Or what's going on? Cool. Any thoughts or questions? Any recommendations? Does it make sense? What I'm about to start doing for the next 15, 20 minutes? Cool. Okay, so I'm just opening up my terminal. I'm going to try and keep it on this side so we can have a look. I'm going to create a new directory. Let's call this examples. Okay. So I'm just going to open up my editor in this directory. Fun, cool. Okay, so I have an empty working directory. The first thing that you did was create a test framework so we can create specs for our program. So let's just go ahead and start this process. Why does that come over on that screen if I right click? The first thing I want is my spec runner. And in my spec runner, I want to require my test framework. Does anyone have a test framework I can just quickly copy and they want to Slack it to me? I think Anastasis, I use yours. Maybe I can use that we did yesterday. Maybe I'll use that one. Then I need to require my my source code. I'm going to leave this blank for the moment until I think about what I need to do for this. So I'm going to put a comment here about what I want this to do. This is going to be require source code. And then I want to require my spec code. So in my user stories, these are the things that I want to do. So I'm going to create my spec folder.
Send it.
Oh, thank you. I'm also going to create my test framework, test framework.rb, and Anastasis. Cool. Let's use this. Calculator. Where did calculator come from? This is if calculator equals plot. Okay, good. What is the year? This is the description, I think. And we want to print the description. Cool. I think that might work. So let's do that. I'm just going to neaten up a little bit and just have it print the description, and then it will do it's okay or they do not match. This is a very simple test framework. Okay, so I'll have to require source code, I'll have to require spec code, and that's all fine for me. I'll probably have it in from my lib folder and from my spec folder. So I'm going to create a lib is just short for library. It's just a common place for like conventionally people place their source code. Sometimes you'll see in different languages it'll be called src for source code. Sometimes you'll see test rather than spec for test code. Okay, so I think I'm about ready to look at my user stories. Now, it might just be a nice idea to create a README and just keep the user stories here so I can just have a look at them. Okay. So at this point, let's go through our sort of extraction, try and create a domain model from this. So what I want to do is do my nouns and verbs. Let's just do below each other for the moment because you can see it. So the nouns for this user story, dock my bike at the docking station. So I have a docking station as a noun. Let's not do the object straight away, docking station. And we have a bike. And for this user story, docking station and a bike as well. And for verbs, I want to be able to dock my bike. So here's going to be a dock and release. Okay, so that's my nouns and verbs. How do I translate this to a table? I'm going to try and do it simply over here. So this is nouns and verbs. These are going to be my objects. And my messages. Docking station is going to have a dock method. I want to dock my bike at the docking station. And it will probably take like a bike as an argument, something like this. I don't think bike has any messages at the moment, so it's going to have a dock, and my dock station is also going to have a release method. And it won't take an argument, it will just release a bicycle. So this is the moment, I know it's not the prettiest table, but this is my sort of functional representation of the two user stories. According to these user stories, I want to dock my bike at the docking station. I have a docking station, dock bike over here, and then docking station to release a bike. Cool. This is at the moment my objects and messages table. Now from here, I need to think about what my sort of spec is going to look like. So at this point, I'm going to think about a docking station as well. I'm going to put the majority of my code. So I'm going to write a spec for this file or for this object. So I'm going to go into my spec folder and create a file called docking station spec.rb. I'm going to keep this on the right hand side so we can see it. This is where we got to during our sort of practical session just earlier. And the process, the next step after this is to convert from our functional representation from our domain model. We have to create some acceptance criteria, some specs. Okay, so I can use my spec runner. I've got my spec code over here, so I'll be requiring my docking station spec.rb. So that's the spec I want to run. And I'll write the file now. It's going to be my docking station.rb file. So let's just create it. I'll keep it empty for the moment. I'm not writing any source code. Docking station.rb. Cool. Okay, so in my spec, I want to do this first story. So I'm going to use the syntax from our test framework using a method giving it a description and passing it a block of code. So I can use brackets here as a method, or I can just keep it without, because it's Ruby, it's meant to be readable. And I'm going to have it as an argument. I'm going to try to write the name of this test. The name of the test is it.bike, quite simply. I like to keep it readable because of the method it now reads like as like a specification. It can dock a bike, which is nice. That's why Ruby is so beautiful. Okay, so it can dock a bike. What do I want to do? I'm using my cert equals method for my test framework. I'm going to compare two values. So this is going to be my verify step, which means I need a few other steps in here. I need to do my setup, and at some point I execute. There's this 3 steps that we go through a test. We set a test up with objects, and then we execute some code and we verify what happened. So as part of my setup, I need to create a docking station. So docking station equals docking station.new. Now notice I haven't written any source code. I'm imagining what's going to happen. I'm creating an instance of a class that I will define in a second. After I've written this failing test, I'm imagining what this is going to do. So I'm going to set up a docking station, and then I want to create a bike. That's interesting. Okay, let's create a bike. So it means I'll need to create an object for bike. And then I want to do something like docking station. I'll do it outside here for the moment. Let's actually be clear. We'll do some code here. This is the execute phase. Docking station dock bike. That's exactly, this is the point of this method, so I want to happen. And as a result, what do I want this, how do I want to make sure that I know what happens as a result of this method? What should it return? So this involves thinking a little bit and being like, okay, so once I dock a bike, how do I know that some results has happened? Now, what I want to happen is I want to store this bike because I want at some point release it. So a nice way to store like items in a program language is use an array as like a structure to hold items. So at some point I want to push into an array this item. So I could do something like and check if it exists in it. So maybe I need to have another public method for docking station to see what current bikes there are. So maybe I'll do something like this: docking station.bikes, and then check that it's equal to the bike. I make sure the bike is in the array. That could be something to do, or maybe I could check that the length is now like 1. Maybe that's a way to do it. I think I like the other approach. So I'm just going to have a look to see whether there's a bike in the array. Let's start there. I'm not going to think too much about it. So I'm going to store that result into a variable, and then I'm going to assert. So I want that to be true. I want those things to be the same thing. If I successfully push this bike, pushes by.new into an array and hold it, and then see whether it's there, this should be true. So results should be true. So there might be a couple of ways we could sort of set up a test for this, but this is good enough. I'm not going to think too much about it. This helps me define when I'm done, and that's the point of the test. Now, if I use this 3 times, that won't be the same because I'll have an array of 3 bikes. So I'll have to write a different test to cover that scenario. But this is enough for the moment. I can dock a bike, I can create a docking station, I'll create my bike, and then I execute some code by docking a bike. And then there's this thing here where it's another public method that I think I'm going to need to sort of show me what the bikes are. And I want it to be equal to just an array of 1 bike. Okay, so I'm going to run my spec runner and just see how far I get. So there'll be a bunch of errors, and we'll just go through them one at a time. So Ruby spec runner. So first of all, the syntax error. Oh no. Test framework, line 13. So again, I'm looking here. Test framework, line 13 is a syntax error. So I'm just going to double check my syntax, and I very quickly see that the strings aren't syntax highlighted, which means there's going to be just a copy paste error with the character. You can see that the actual characters look slightly different, so I'm just going to replace all the quotation marks. This sometimes happens. When you copy paste with different fonts, sometimes the editor doesn't understand what's going on. Cool. Let's try that again. Okay. So here we have our documentation.spec on line 7. We tried to use a documentation, and quite clearly we haven't created it. So let's now go and solve this. Uninitialized constant, we tried to access this class constant, but it doesn't exist yet because we haven't written it. So let's write it. Class docking station. And then let's run our test again. Same thing, uninitialized constant bike this time. So you can see we're slowly making our way through the spec on our docking station spec. Line 7, it didn't know what this was, so I've now defined it. Didn't know what this is, so now I'm going to define it. So I'll go to lib, create another file called bike.rv, and with a class definition for bike. Run my spec again. It's still uninitialized, so let's just understand what's happening. We go from our test framework of documentation, spec runner. So I need to add another require statement to load the file. So let's load the file. Cool. So I've now loaded both my source files. I've loaded my spec code. I've run my spec code. And now I've got to this line here, undefined method doc. So this is now when I'm writing my source code. I need to define a method doc. If it says it's undefined, it means I need to define it. And this is the idea of test-driven development. It says I'm going to imagine what I need to do and codify it in a test, and then make it pass. So this is what I expect to happen. Undefined method doc, so I'm going to go to my docking station and define a doc method. Run my test again. Notice how often I'm running my tests. I'm constantly running my tests to get feedback and get output. Cool. Okay, so this error message says wrong number of arguments, given 1, expected 0. So in my test, I gave it 1, but my method here says nothing. So I'm going to give it an argument. I want to be able to dock bikes. Then we get on to the next line of our spec on line 12. So I'm going to actually put this on the right-hand side so we can see it. So now it says I want to know what bikes is, so let's define the method bikes. I'll think about what it should do later. I'm just defining the methods. Cool, so now we actually get our test run that says conduct a bike, they do not match. So we have a failure, a test failure. So now we actually need to go and think about how we get this to pass. So I've got all the methods that I need, and I want to be able to store the bike. So when I dock the bike, I need to have like an initial value. I need to have an initial array. So I want to be able to create a docking station with a starting array, just like a structure to hold some items. So I want to call this with an instance variable at bikes and just have it as an empty array. We'll start off empty. There might be different ways to do this, then we'll just see how it goes. Dockstation.dockBikes. When I dock a bike, I want to just push the bike into the array. And then my bikes method, I want to just simply return the bikes. So in my spec code, I'm saying dock a bike and just like store it in the holding array. On this line, I want to return that array of bikes, just see whether it's in there. And I verify that it should be true. Cool, so I can see down here, it's okay, solved. I can double check if, like, for example, I change my source code not to do that. You can see that I now fail. Sometimes it's nice to double check by just changing your source code to see whether you get test failures you expect. Cool. So this is the first user story converted into acceptance criteria, into a spec, and then writing code to pass that test. Let's do it once more with the next user story, and then I'll finish there and we can go through questions of what you've been noticing or what you think. Let's go back to the README. I have this user story. So I'm going to just keep it in my spec file. And then I'm going to write another test. I want to look at my README again. I'm looking at docking stations. I have a release method. That's the one I want to write. Okay, so my spec says it can release a bike. So I'm going to go through my 3 phases. I'm going to go do setup, execute some code, and then I want to verify what happened. And this is what I want you to get practice at, writing your specs in this way until it becomes second nature, to always think about what you want to happen. So my setup, I need to create a docking station. I'll need to dock a bike first to be able to then release it. So I'll need a bike as well. As part of my setup, I actually want to go through this step. So I want to dock a bike. And then the execute phase, I want to be able to do something like, according to my objects messages table, I do docking station dot release. Just that. And I expect this, let's do that as a result. And verify assert equals. Then I want to compare the results. I want that to be bike. So I want to be able to store it in the docking station. And then when I release it, I want the results of my release method, my return value, to be a bike. And so I want it to be exactly the same bike that I docked. It feels like it'll be okay for now. So let's go through and run the spec, see it fail. Always see, whenever you write a spec, always see it fail. Undefined method release. That feels like it's a good error message. Undefined method release. So let's go ahead and define this method. Def release. Run it again. So I get my test failure or the message that says they do not match. Cool. So I need to look at my bikes array and remove one from it. So very simply, I can just remove the last one that was added and pass that test. So that's all I'm going to do for the moment. I've met my tests. At this point here, I'm going to think about if there's any way that I could clean this up or refactor it, or clean up my tests. But I'm going to leave my tests as it is because I think it's descriptive. So that will be enough. Anything that I can do here, I might change this and use Ruby's shortcut method as an attribute reader. Might just do that instead. As soon as I change anything, just run the test to see whether anything is different. And so maybe that's where I'll stop. Cool. So we've gone through the stages of looking at taking a user story and trying to extract nouns and verbs and decompose the user story into sort of like bits and looking at those nouns and verbs and creating objects and messages. And they're using those objects and messages to think about how to codify the behavior as a specification. And this part here is where I did a bunch of thinking and trying to imagine what I wanted to happen. And there are different ways to test code, so feel free to write your tests in different ways, so long as it feels useful. And I set up my test using different phases, using setup, setting up my objects, executing some code, and then verifying what happened using my assert equals method from our test framework. Cool. So this is a demonstration of this next step. So going from the user stories to writing spec and passing code. We're looking at how we go through that red-green, race to red, race to green cycle. What are your thoughts?
One option I see is Birmingham Airport in Birmingham. Want to try that one?
No.
The next one is East Midlands Airport on Dove Road, Derby. About 33 miles to your east, and it gets 2.8 star.
Well, that was an interesting interpretation of what I was saying.
Sorry, about Ed's code.
Yeah.
And I'm still sharing still recording as well, so we'll have that all on camera. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording.